Hey, folks. I know you could be listening to one of a million different podcasts right now, and I am super grateful you picked this one. Welcome to The Human Show. I'm your host, Trish, a holistic life coach and a mom navigating this complex world of human emotions. Here, we will share stories, insights, research, and information to help you step into the most true version of yourself so you can be a happy human. Now let's get into it. Hey, folks. Thanks for being here. I am joined once again by the super cool Russell Gorga, who is a engineer turned professor turned life coach turned, in the process of becoming an adult chair certified master coach. So Russell, thanks for being here. And is that a accurate description of kind of where things are now?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I will go with that and and try to be a full-time dad at the same time, so we got to throw that into the mix. But yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
we can't forget that super
No, of
important
course
job.
not.
Yeah.
Parenting,
So we're
absolutely.
talking about self-care, and specifically today, you and I are going to talk about boundaries. And I really wanted to include boundaries in the self-care discussion because I think
Hmm.
it is often overlooked as a component of self-care. And if we are not practicing setting boundaries, not only can that affect our mental health, but uh, truly it could affect your physical health too. If you're the kind of
Yeah.
person that says yes to so many things because you
Hmm.
feel bad saying no, you could potentially end up physically exhausted, not just mentally exhausted. So I think it's important to discuss boundaries with respect to self care.
Absolutely. Yeah, physically exhausted. I think even from a physiological or physical viewpoint, it could lead to other illnesses and whatnot. So it doesn't even, I would say it doesn't even end with just physically, emotionally exhausted. It could manifest in all kinds of things that can be happening in your body for sure. So yes, it's super critical for self-care. And yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think I knew what a boundary was 5 years ago. Or if I did, it was by accident, or I didn't know I was setting boundaries or had the capability of it. And so it's really amazing once somebody learns what that is, how that can impact your life for the better, right? So I guess the question begs for people listening, how do we define a boundary?
Yeah, it's exactly what I was thinking. Let's
Yeah, right.
start at the
Let's
beginning to
let's start at the beginning.
anyone who's new to
Yeah.
boundaries. So I think there are a number of ways to define it. And I think this was years ago when I watched a Brene Brown talk and she said, or maybe it was a book. I've read books, I've watched her talks. And she said something like, a boundary tells people like what is okay with you, what is not okay with you. I mean, it's
Yeah.
very, very simply put. It's
Very simply put.
um, so tell me about, because you're kind of, I also am new to boundaries probably in the last 5, 6 years. So
Yeah.
tell me what how you learned it or what you learned about it by
Yeah, I'll tell you
definition.
that story. I think another cool thing for people tuned in to your podcast is like I think people have a better concept of say like literally a physical boundary, right? And so, if you have a fence around your house, that's a physical boundary around your property that kind of indicates this is my yard and that's not. But even for us as humans, everyone's been in that place in the grocery store when people are just way too close. And I think when COVID happened, we became way more aware of our physical boundaries, right? We had to be separated by 5 or 6
Mm-hmm.
feet to wait in line for something. And so I think if you didn't have a good idea of your own physical boundaries, you probably had no choice but to learn it better through COVID and standing apart. And then, so that's a physical boundary. And then more in general, what's generally okay with you and what's not. So like, for a close friend of mine or, one of my kids, you could be kind of sitting right on top of me. That's okay. But in a grocery store, I kind of want a little bit of space between me and the person behind me.
Understood.
and sometimes I forget that. And I'm like, oh, I'm getting close. And like, I look at the person in front of me and they turn around and like, and they're thinking, they don't say this, but like, can you take a step back? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in a rush. You know, my energy is like right up in there.
Yeah.
um, yeah, just more generally learning about what they are in terms of like what's okay with you and what's not okay with you. And so saying yes to everything, like you kind of indicated, if you're not someone who's good with your own boundaries and you're saying yes to everyone else for doing, it could be anything, taking me to the airport, picking this up, dropping that off, it doesn't matter. If you're saying yes to everyone and for everything, you you basically don't kind of know where you stop and the other person starts, right? And so it's kind of and it's it gets exhausting, right? And so if you find yourself at the end of the day just sitting on the couch and being like, I am exhausted. What happened today? Maybe that's a good idea to take a look around and think about, what did you say yes to that you didn't really want to say yes to, or that you felt obligated to do, or that if you didn't do it, you weren't a good friend, a good parent, a good partner, or, insert whatever word that is there. You weren't a good employee. You weren't whatever. And so learning how to say no to things is a really important boundary. And the
Yeah.
coolest thing about even expressing your boundaries is the easiest and shortest version of a boundary is no, period.
Yeah. And our teacher, Michelle, has said, I've heard her say it plenty of times, no
Yeah.
is a complete sentence.
And those a complete sentence. Absolutely.
um,
Now that might not be what you want to give someone you're close to because
yeah.
it may seem short, but it is okay. And I think a lot of times in the workplace, with stuff being thrown at you, people tend to be afraid to say no because they don't want their boss to be mad, or they feel like, their job might be in jeopardy, or they might not be up for that promotion, or they might not get a good performance review. Or in families, saying no might make it feel like you're selfish, right? That you're not thinking about another person and whatnot. And so that we have all these sort of beliefs and viewpoints about why it's not okay to say no, and why it's not okay to sort of think about yourself and what you need. And I think the classic example that Michelle's shared, but I think it's come from other places as well, is sort of like when they teach you on the airplane about the safety procedures, and they say like you need to put your oxygen mask on before you put the oxygen mask on for one of your children who may not be able to do it for themselves. And parents can be like, or caregivers could be like, wow, what, I mean, no, I'm worried about them. But it's like, well, if you're not taking care of yourself, how can you take care of anybody else? Right? If I'm not breathing oxygen and then my brain's not making sense, how am I going to support someone else that may need to rely on me if my brain's compromised because I'm not breathing the oxygen in? So I think that's a beautiful way to think about it. So if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not giving what we need for ourselves on a regular basis, how could we show up in the best way we can for our partners, for our kids, for our friends at the workplace and things like that?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
so, and that feeds right into the self-care part.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And I think a cool thing about self-care is one of the classic things people will start to think is, well, if I, that's selfish. There's this belief that self-care equals selfishness or being selfish. And that's a really important myth to debunk, right? And so we could even spend time, talking about that. Taking care of yourself is super important for you. And if you're not taking care of yourself, how are you going to take care of the people around you, the people that you care about? How are you going to do your job to the quality and satisfaction that you want to do it, right? And so taking a little bit of time for yourself, for having the boundaries in place. Well, this is my time and this is how I'm going to take care of myself. So I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to go take a walk uninterrupted, for an hour. And maybe I'll listen to a podcast or a meditation or music, or I won't listen to anything, but I'm not going to let other people interfere with that or try to take that away. Or if I have to rearrange my schedule and I can't do it first thing in the morning, where am I going to fit that me time to connect with nature and be outside and later in the day?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk about a little where, at least I think our generation, and our generations past, boundaries, it's not something we learned as kids. And that's why, like you
Mm-mm.
and I, for example, just started learning about it like when we were over 40, and um, what I think one of the things that happens, and I talk from my own experience, as kids, we learn that other people's feelings are more important than ours. And we
Hmm.
need to make sure everybody else is okay. Like we sort of learn people pleasing. So if we say, I don't want to do that, and the other person gets upset, what we learn is, well, you don't want them to be upset. So then just say yes. Like that's kind of what I learned. And then,
Yeah.
um, so I spent a lot of my life doing things I didn't want to do, being
Hmm.
uncomfortable because what I learned was I'm not, but like I felt guilty saying no. Or if the other person got upset, then I was like, oh, okay, you know what? No, it's all right. I'll do it. I'll help you out, that kind of thing. Um, and it stinks when I think about, like when I was a kid, you know, and tell me if this happened to you too. Like your parents or, whatever people are saying, maybe you go to a family party and they're like, oh, give so and so a hug. Oh, give Uncle Joe a hug. Okay. And I'm like, I don't want to hug them. But then parents like, go give them So then I go and I feel like that's something that happens a lot. And it's what came up for me when I was thinking about boundaries. I was like, how
Yeah.
many times I hugged someone and I was very uncomfortable doing it, but that's what I learned. So then you grow up and now that's what you learn, and you do all these things that you're really not comfortable doing. And some, like you talked about, giving somebody a ride, like it's not really going to affect your life that much. But then there are other things where we may have let our bodily space be violated because this is what we learned,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
it's our discomfort is not as important as the other person's, um, I don't know, happiness, content, whatever it is, so, and it makes me, when I think about that kind of thing, the physical stuff, I feel a little ill about it. And
Mm.
it's why I've been so adamant about teaching my kids how to
Yeah.
say no and how to receive no.
Right.
Because
Y-
if you're on the other end of the no, you might be like, you might get a little, might be pissed. Like, what do you mean you're not going to do that for me? What do you mean I'm going to?
Yeah.
So you have to learn how to say no and you have to learn how to receive no. And I'm teaching my kids. I've been teaching them for years, and it's a constant practice. Because I didn't get it, and I was like, I don't want them to. I don't want to perpetuate this cycle. But for our
Absolutely.
generation, I think that's how it started. And now we're
Yeah.
grown ups, and we're like, oh, wait a minute. It's okay for me to say no. And then you have to relearn. You have to like retrain yourself to, and that's hard. That's really hard if you're not used to doing it.
And it's hard for the people around you. So much you just shared, Trish. I have so many things I want to springboard off of, but it's hard for the people around you if you're not someone who has been historically good at setting boundaries and you start doing it, you might get a lot of pushback from the
Hmm.
people around you, your partner, your kids, even your friends, coworkers, bosses, whomever. It's like all of a sudden, who's Trish telling me no now all of a sudden? Like, what's this business? How come she
Right.
doesn't want to give me a hug all of a sudden?
Right. Right.
Now
Right.
she's not a hugger.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, the no thing, what you said, how you give no and how you receive no is really important. And again, that's what's happening in my house as well with my kids, who are 15. Leonardo's 15 and like 6'3", pushing 6'4", and Cecilia's 13 and shorter but still tall. But like they'll still kind of muck around with each other and whatnot. And then you'll hear Cecilia usually say no, and it still keeps going. And that's when I jump right in. I was like, no means no. Okay. And she's got to learn too. Like if you don't mean no, then find a different word, like slow down, or that's too much, or whatever. But we need to have a language where if no really means stop, that's what you need to say when it needs to stop or when something's not okay. And that's what the other person needs to receive as, okay, now I stop or I don't go further or whatever that looks like. And that's a super important language for us to teach younger people how to do really well.
Oh yeah. And like, yeah, like you were just saying, it's a great example about your kids. And that's often the way it comes up with my kids. They're messing around. They're younger, a little younger than yours, and they're goofing around and having a good time. But then one of them is like, stop. And then if they say stop a second time, then I get right in there and I'm like, they said stop, it's done.
Yeah.
And then the other one's usually like, yeah, but she was laughing and it was, I'm like, but now it's not fun. She was having fun. Now it's not fun anymore. And that's another important piece because, um, and this reminds me of another, I'm going back to Brene Brown again, but she did an interview with someone and he was talking about his like 2, 3 year old daughter. And he had a hard time saying no to her because like, oh, she's so cute and she asked for a piece of chocolate and I say no, but then she's like, oh, please, dad. And then he gives in and he gives her the chocolate. And she said, okay, now what you need to think about is fast forward 10, 12 years and she's in the back seat of someone's car and she says no and they keep pushing and then she gives in because it's too hard to say, and she's learned
Mhm.
if saying no is too hard, then just say yes.
Yeah,
And that
absolutely.
story really, like I felt that in my gut and it stuck with me. And it was one of
Yeah.
the reasons I was like, my kids need to learn this because I mean, no matter who it is, and it doesn't have to
Right.
be physical intimacy, it can be anything, but
No.
um, being comfortable saying no and knowing that it's okay to change your mind. You might enter a situation and think, well, this is okay. I'm cool with this. And then get into it. And then you're like, oh, hang on. It doesn't feel right anymore. Like now I'm
Right.
uncomfortable. I need to get out. And knowing that that's okay, whatever the situation is, it's okay for
Yeah.
you to change your mind as soon as you feel uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Listen to that feeling and honor it. And that's
Hmm.
what a lot of us didn't learn growing up. And it's why it's so hard now. Like now we're trying to learn it as adults, which is
Hmm.
harder. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. For a whole variety of reasons.
yeah.
Absolutely. And the other thing that's funny when you were telling that story about, the kid just kept saying, "Oh, please," and then the parent changes their mind. In the other perspective of that, that could teach the younger person that if they want to get what they want, to just be persistent and try to poke at boundaries, right? And like try to pick them apart, which then you could sort of set up, well, does this create a situation where someone becomes more manipulative or more controlling? So it kind of, there's another viewpoint to that as well that kind of came up in my mind. So like, hey, I'm going to keep poking this boundary until it falls and I get what I want, right? So that's another way to look at sort of that
Yeah. And that's where
relationship.
learning to receive no comes in.
Yeah.
When
Yeah, absolutely.
you're on
Exactly.
the receiving end of it,
Yeah,
learn to receive
100%.
no and not keep pushing, like learning to
Right.
respect other people's boundaries. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I think no is boundaries aren't just about saying no, but I feel like it has become just the comfort. I don't know if it's comfortability or confidence in saying no seems like such a challenge for people in our generation. And
Hmm.
that's why I feel like that our conversation keeps coming back to no. It's not boundaries isn't just about saying no, but it seems to be one of the hardest things that we struggle with.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we can segue out of just saying no as well. But, one thing that you talked about earlier is when you grew up with your caregivers and being afraid or, wanting to make them happy so you're happy. Like, especially for listeners or viewers that are, had these parents, mothers, fathers, caregiver, older brother, doesn't even matter, sibling, cousin, whatever, aunt, uncle. It's like it's like, if someone in your life is really unhealthy and you realize at a very early age, well, if and so and just any example, my mom say, if my mom's upset, she's going to take it out, and like everyone's going to be unhappy. So if we make mom happy, then everything's going to be okay. And so right there, that's where your boundaries get really, and there's a meshment, which is a whole different sort of thing. But if mom's not okay, no one's okay. We're going to work really hard to make sure mom's okay so that we're okay. And that's where that becomes, now I don't know where I stop and the other person starts, or vice versa. And it's like, and then all of a sudden, that's where the whole idea of like, oh, people are talking about walking on eggshells, or they hear the door close when so and so comes home, or the garage door open. And it's like all of a sudden there's this nervous system response, because you're like, oh, what am I going to have to do to make sure that person's going to be okay? Or what if they're not in a good mood? Then what do I do? And so like it's hard to have boundaries in those situations, because you can't, right? Because if you tell that person that you don't want to do something, or you're not okay with giving your aunt or uncle a hug, and you're going to get in trouble and it's going to come out on you, you're going to learn from a really early age that it's not safe for me to speak my voice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point.
And so part of boundaries can even be thought of as, if we transition out of just saying no, as being able to speak your voice for what you want and what you need. And a lot of us that grew up in an environment where someone, we had to worry about how someone else is feeling or going to react, we might not even really have a good sense of what we actually want and what we need. And that's what it took me a really long time to figure out, because I was either trying to please my mom or trying to please a partner in a relationship. And so much of my time was consumed with, are they getting what they need, that I never had time to reflect on what it is that I need and what I actually want. And then once I realized that, it's like you have like a Saturday morning, and all of a sudden you're like, well, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? I don't even know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because
You're so
because I
focused on
haven't
what,
had any boundaries.
yeah, you don't know what it means to even know what you want. Um, yeah.
So
And I think another part, if we're getting away from just the no aspect of it, like, like I mentioned before, part of setting boundaries is letting people know what's okay with you, what's not okay with you. And it could be, um, let's say, and I think it comes up a lot with families because you grew up with them, you spent the most time with them, like they've known you since you were small. And there are things that maybe you did as a kid growing up, and this other person, they still see you in that way. And they,
mhm,
let's say it's I don't know, maybe you were the screw up or the goofball, so every time that they talk about like how you're the goofball and, oh, what are you going to do this time, and you this, and you're thinking, I'm not that person anymore, like that's not. And that's an example of where you would say to that person, hey, I know I was always the goofball, but I'm kind of like, I'm doing some other things, and I'm not really comfortable
mhm,
being identified as that anymore. So could you not say that, or
yeah,
word it however you want? But it's things like that, like letting people know, um, I don't want to be talked to in that way, or I don't want to
right,
be identified in that way. Like that doesn't feel right for me. This is what's right for me now. Could you just respect that? And again, there are going to be people that don't respond well
mhm,
to
oh yeah,
that because they'll take it personally. And we have to remember that that's, then that's their own stuff if they
yeah,
take it personally. Like when we're setting boundaries, it's not it, the purpose of boundaries is not to control others' behavior, or not to keep other people away, or boundaries are about taking care of ourselves. And that's what it's
mhm,
about. It's about me. If I set a boundary, it's about me. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's about me. So
mhm,
that's important to remember. Um, if we start setting boundaries, if it's new for us and we start practicing and we get that pushback, just remind yourself, I'm not doing this, is not against them. It's just
mhm.
for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I think, and also, if you're new at practicing boundaries, it's going to take some practice for you the giver of the boundary to sort of set it right, and it's going to take some practice for whoever is on the receiving end to really understand that, especially like you said, if you have a very long established relationship like family members or a partnership or even a relationship with a boss or a coworker or a friend that you've been in for a very long time. Getting used to giving that boundary and having that person receive that might take some practice, and there might be pushback, or it might just be that the person isn't used to it, and that it's not even that they don't want to respect your boundary, they just kind of forget and like, oh yeah, so and so doesn't want to be reminded or remembered as the goofball. I'm like, okay, yeah, fair enough. I just, that's a pattern. We slip into these
Mhm.
patterns and we get really used to it. And so part of the boundary and reinforcing it in a healthy way is like, hey, remember, like, I want to break out of this pattern. I don't want to be in this pattern anymore. Like we had a pattern with some family members, my brother, my uncle, and three of us, and it was like it was very kind of, it could be very, joking around, but sort of cutting each other down in a way. And at one point, we made the decision that we weren't going to do that anymore. Like we were going to build ourselves up, and like not even in a joking way and whatnot. And we would catch each other occasionally and be like, "Hey, I thought we're building each other up." That's kind of the word we or the phrase we use. We're building each other up. We're not cutting each other down. And all of us would jump in at one point or another, like, "Hey, I thought we're building each other up." And you're like, "Yep, you're right. Good reminder."
That's so cool.
Absolutely, yeah. And uh and and thinking about, another way for us to talk about boundaries is, getting away from just saying no, is like if you're in a situation like you had said earlier that makes you uncomfortable, you have the voice to speak up about it. Like, like it's, we're getting into this sort of heated political season right now, and I was with a group of people, and they just started talking really derogatorily about politics, sort of in general, and about particular candidates. And it was like it wasn't a healthy discourse on politics. It was just more like a bashing kind of thing. And it wasn't even like they were on one side and I was on the other. It was just like it was really bad energy for me, and I didn't want to participate in it. And I basically was like, I don't want to participate in this. Like, let's change the subject, or like, I'm going to leave. And going back to you saying, you're not trying to control someone else. You're just trying to speak up for what's okay for you. And so the bottom line is, if you give a boundary out, like, hey, I don't want to talk, I don't want to bash, poli- you know, politician bashing or whatever. I just don't want to do it. And the other people decide they want to do it. I can't force them to stop, but I can get up and leave, right? I can say, okay, y'all, I'm out of here. Let's talk again next time we see each other, or whatever. And that's it. That was my boundary. I spoke, like, I don't want to just sit here and have this bashing going on. And if they continue to want to do that, and then it's my choice to get up and say, I don't want to be here. I'm going to leave. And I not necessarily do it in a jerky, negative, mean way and be pissed off, but just get up and be like, this isn't comfortable for me. I'm not having a good time. And I'm going to remove myself so that I'm protecting what I want in terms of my energy space and my energy field. And that's a boundary.
Yeah, I
And
think
then
that's
if
a good example.
Yeah, and if you're mad at the other people, well, then that's on you. Well, there's a couple things, right? I mean, they could be respectful of it, but if they were really having a good time and they were feeding off of each other, and I was sort of raining on their parade, then hey, it's their prerogative to keep having that discussion if that's it, and I don't have to be a part of it.
Right. It's like you're saying, whatever, if you're enjoying yourselves, I'm not telling you whatever you're doing is wrong. I'm just saying that it's not a good fit for me right now. Like I need something different. So I'm going to remove
Exactly.
myself. And then
Right.
so again, it's just you taking care of yourself, not being critical or judgmental of anyone else. You're
Right.
just saying what I need is something else. So I'll take myself out of this.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, there's so any situation that you find yourself in that's not comfortable for you. Oh, and we didn't talk about this. There's like an internal and an external boundary, right? And it's so like that's a good point too. So say you're at a party, let's just throw something out, and you don't want to be around a bunch of like intoxicated people that might be doing sort of inappropriate things or silly or things that are just making you uncomfortable. Instead of going into the party with telling your host or whoever party it is, well, I'm not going to be comfortable with excessive drinking or whatever that looks like, and whatnot. It's not their job to sort of make sure that doesn't happen, but your own internal boundary can be like, I want to show up. I want to, yeah, I would like to connect with these people, but there's going to come a point where there might be excessive drinking. And if I feel like people are doing that, then I'm going to leave. And you don't have to tell that to anybody. You don't have to say, like, to the host, well, what if people start to get really wasted? I'm out of here. Like, that's just your own internal boundary. Or like, if it gets to the point where people are slurring or being sloppy or whatever, I'm out of here because that's not what I want to be around. And that's your own internal boundary, which I think is important for us to have as well, and sort of knowing like when do you really need to speak up because you need your voice to be heard and something, and when do you just need to protect yourself and remove yourself. So someone in this example that I'm making up, if someone came up to you and started sort of saying rude things or inappropriate things because they had had too much to drink, do you say something back? And what kind of response might that elicit? You might say, this is making me uncomfortable, I'm going to leave, and then you leave, and that's it, and not get into a big sort of debate with that, or you just literally turn around and walk out. That's okay too.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, the internal and external, because boundaries doesn't always mean you have to say something. It doesn't mean you have
Right.
to stand up and say, I'm not okay with this. You can just say it inside. And I think that's a great example is going into a social situation where maybe oh, there's a certain person that you're not comfortable with and they might be there or this,
Hmm.
but like you said, I want to go because these certain friends are going to be there. I haven't seen them. I'd like to catch up with them. And
Right.
you decide that ahead of time. Hey, I'm going because I want to connect with these people.
Hmm.
If there's any kind of interaction or with this other person and I'm uncomfortable, then that's my cue to leave. And then
Hmm.
I decide that that's my limit. That's my boundary. Like
Yeah.
if I get to that point and I'm uncomfortable, I'm leaving. And I don't have to tell, like you said, I don't have to tell anyone that.
Right. No, not at all. Just people's energy. Like, we could talk about introverts versus extroverts. And so if like, like you said, you want to connect with these certain people, but after 1 hour in a large social situation, you're going to be exhausted and you've got to go. So that's your internal boundary. I'm going to show up because I genuinely want to connect with some subset of that group, but because it's going to be this size party or interaction, I know it's going to be draining. So I'm going to go connect with these few folks. And then after that connection, or after say an hour, when I know like I'm depleted after an hour, I'm just going to get in the car or walk home or whatever. And that's it. You don't have to advertise that. It's your own internal thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And one of the things that going back to saying no, I think that was my problem for a long time because um I would because like you just said about getting socially exhausted, it took me a long time to accept the fact that my capacity or like my social bank account is a certain size.
Hmm.
And when it gets depleted, I'm done. Like I need a break. I need to step back. I need like a reset. And for a long time, I didn't recognize that. I just, I would be socially depleted, but then, someone would ask me, like maybe my wife would say, oh, so and so invited us over this weekend. And every part of me is like, I don't want to go anywhere. Like I'm done talking to people. But then I'm like, oh, but I should because they're our good friends and I should go and I should want to see them and I should want to spend time with my wife and
Mm.
not let her go by herself. All of that
Yeah.
should.
Should,
And
should,
then
should. Yeah.
we had kids and then it became, all kinds of other commitments. And if there was a day that we didn't have something, I was so happy. There was nothing. But my wife, her capacity is much larger. Her social account is
Mm.
much larger than mine.
Hmm.
So she'll say, if there's a spot in the calendar, she'll put something in it. Like, hey, let's do
Yeah.
this. And then I'm like, ah. So I would end up, you know, she'd say, oh, let's take the kids to this thing. It looks really fun. And inside I'm like, oh my, I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to do anything. And then all the shoulds come in and I'm like, oh, but I
Right.
should want to spend time with my family.
Right.
And if I don't go, then she has to wrangle all the kids by herself, and I should make the most of family time and all the should, right? I spent
Hmm.
decades of my life shoulding on myself. And I finally I finally realized, okay, what happens when I say yes because of all the shoulds?
Hmm.
Then I'm resentful. Then I go to
Mm.
this thing, this event, this whatever it is, and I kind of suck. Like, I'm very easily irritated. I'm critical of like everything, like, oh, this is so expensive and these lines are too long and this and that. And I'm just, everything.
Yeah.
I'm complaining about everything because I
Right.
don't want to be there. So
Right.
I can't even tell you how many times I did that.
Yeah.
And finally was like, you know what? If I say yes when I really want to say no, then I'm showing up as a pretty kind of lousy version of myself. And that's not really it's not good for me. It's not good for anyone else.
No.
So
Absolutely.
if I say no and the other person, like if it's my wife, it's her first reaction is maybe she's disappointed because I'm not going. That's going to be temporary. And she's going to have more fun with the kids without cranky Trish tagging along and raining on everybody's parade. So when I finally accepted this, then I it was like it changed. Like it changed a lot of, even our relationship and me, and just even my self-care. I
Mm.
was able to give myself more self-care because I was able to say that's too much for me.
Mhm.
Like if XYZ is in our schedule and then this time is a break, and then she says, "Oh, well, let's do that." Now I can say, that's too much for me. And
Absolutely.
it's so much better for everyone.
Yeah.
Um, so I think anyway, that was a big learning um experience for me, just to
Hmm.
recognize my own capacity for socializing, for parenting, for just, adulting,
Right.
you
Absolutely.
know.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to sort of what we talked about earlier with understanding what your own personal needs are, right? And so you didn't have an awareness around that. And most of us don't, right? And most of us are operating in the shoulds, like, and that's a great thing for people tuned in to this podcast is if you're committing or agreeing to do something, it's a very good question to ask, like, why am I agreeing to do this, or why am I planning to agree to this? And if any answer comes up because I should, because so and so is expecting it, or so and so is going to be disappointed, or if I don't, then that should be a good warning to you that maybe you're not doing it for the right reasons. That, are you really taking care of what your needs are, or are you just trying to satisfy everyone else's needs, right? And then of course there's a balance between things that you do because you kind of need to, as a parent or as a partner, as a friend and whatnot. And so we're not, I think I'm not anyway, advocating for never ever do anything for anyone else. There's the extreme. I guess we tend to, we as humans sort of go from different extremes, right? It's all
Sure,
hot or all cold
sure.
or all black and all white. So if you're someone who has never had any boundaries and all of a sudden you learn what boundaries are, you may swing way back to the other side now, and now everything's like a no, or I'm not going to do this, or whatever. And that's okay, just sort of figuring out where that space is. But it's like, if you find yourself most of the time doing things because you feel like you should, or what the other person is wanting or expecting, then that's a good warning sign for you that you need to think about what you want, what you need, and how you establish those boundaries.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to ask yourself, um, why am I doing this? And if the reason, like if your answer doesn't start with I,
Hmm.
if
Yeah.
like, or if it has should in it, then yeah, that
Right.
might be a red flag. Like, all right, let's take a beat and reevaluate, you know,
Yeah.
the,
Exactly.
because if you're doing it for the sake of someone else's happiness, then you're going to be resentful and you're not going to show up as your best self.
especially if it's happening all the time, right? We're all going to make sacrifices and do something for another person because it's going to mean something to them, and that's a great thing to do. But if that becomes what you're doing all the time, then that's when the exhaustion, the resentment, and those things start to build up, right? Like, I'm going to go grocery shopping after our podcast, and I should, and I need to. It might not be what I want to do, but but going back to, I don't want to eat frozen pizzas anymore. Right? I'm done with frozen pizza, so I need to go grocery shopping.
Okay. Okay.
I don't necessarily want to, and so I should go. I could have gone last night, but I opted to put it off till today. And so now I'm at the end of the rope. So it's not like having boundaries doesn't mean we don't do anything that we don't want to do. We have to sort of decide what we need and what we want
Well,
and
and
make those decisions.
in that example, your shopping example, I mean, you can reframe that and come at it from the angle of, like you said, I don't want frozen pizza anymore. So
Exactly.
you can
Right.
reframe it as, well, I'm going shopping today because I'd like to get some produce. I'd like to get some of this good stuff in the house, and then
Yeah.
just flip it.
Exactly. No, absolutely.
So
That's exactly
yeah,
my point. Yeah. So
yeah. Um, yeah, I just was thinking about boundaries, um, things like eating and sleeping and exercise, all that kind of stuff, like taking care of our physical health,
mhm,
which does impact our mental health. I think sleeping is a big one. And that's a place where we can set a boundary for the sake of our self care. If it's, let's
yeah.
say your partner maybe can stay up a little later, or so you
Mhm,
think, well, I want to spend time with them. So I'm going to stay up and watch this show, even though it's not done until 10 o'clock. And I
right.
really would like to be in sleeping by 9:30. I'm
Yeah.
going to do this. Like things like that, like recognize, okay, now if I get up in the morning and I'm tired because I really want to go to bed earlier than 10,
Mhm,
recognizing that and speaking up for that and saying, okay, well, you know what, getting into bed at 9 p.m. is better for me all around,
mhm. Yeah.
physically, mentally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, and you can say that in a way that's not, you're not saying, you know what, I don't care. I don't care that you want to hang out until 10 o'clock. I don't. It doesn't have to be that. It's like, hey, I've figured out that I kind of need this much amount of sleep.
Mhm,
So I'm going to start going to bed at 9. Is that cool if we wrap up? We're just hang out from 8:30 to 9 and then I wrap it up.
right.
There's ways to say it, because I think some people who are new to boundaries, they might think, well, I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be confrontational. I don't want to be rude. And
Right.
it doesn't have to, it's not, boundaries are not mean. Like we said, boundaries are taking care of ourselves. So
Mhm,
if staying up late, if, being at this event, it's not what you want, you can say it in a mean way, like, you know what, this is too, this is exhausting, or
right.
this is, like, I don't need to be here. This is,
Right.
I have more important things to do. Like, there are certainly rude ways to express your boundaries. And there are also really tactful, respectful ways to do it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like, hey, I really need this amount of sleep, so I can function well tomorrow. So 9 o'clock's my cutoff. Or, I can't meet for lunch today because I have these other things on my like, thank you. No,
Right.
thank you is great. Thanks
Right.
for inviting me. I have these other things I'd like to take care of today. We do it another
Yeah.
time. Like, there are ways to say it where you are setting your boundary and, being considerate of the other person.
Yeah, absolutely. And like your example about like a bedtime, if you wanted to come at it from a very sort of snarky or attacking way, it could look something like, "You stay up so late. I don't know why you stay up. I can't stay up that late." Like, blah blah blah. Like, I'm going to bed at 9 o'clock. Slam your fist down on
Yeah.
the
Why do you
counter
stay
and
up
then
so
walk out.
late?
So 9 o'clock, and then that's it. And it's like, okay, yeah, but maybe that's not going to land that well with somebody. And then, but I mean, even things that are not super, like a boundary that's not really protecting yourself in a way that that you're not being attacked by someone, or your space isn't violated. I mean, maybe there's some room to negotiate or come to a compromise with a partner or someone, like, oh, I really like going to bed together, like, maybe we could settle on 9:30. Like 9 o'clock might be too early for you, 10 o'clock's too late for me. Is there a happy medium where we can sort of wind things down at the same time and go to bed? Or the other opportunity is like, I'd like to go to bed at 9. I'm not forcing you to. If you want to stay up until 10, you're not trying to control that person. That's their prerogative to do that. And so, yeah, there's tactful ways, like you said, to approach that, and not necessarily be just very blunt and in someone's face about it. Um, the other side of the coin too is you don't need to give someone a lot of explanation for why you are not going to do something or can't do something. So, the example, Michelle Chalfant would give is like, you're rambling on and on. Why you can't make the lunch? Well, I can't make the lunch because, well, here's, my day's pretty packed from 8 to noon, and I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And then, at 12:30, it's my only time for myself. And then as soon as 1 o'clock hits, well, then I got to start doing pickups and I got to do this. And then I still got to go to the grocery store. It's like, no, you don't. You don't need all that. Like you said, thanks for the offer for me to meet you for lunch, but I can't do that today. That's it. And that's not mean. And probably the person on the receiving end doesn't want to hear the laundry list of things that you have to do anyway.
Yeah.
Or sometimes a boundary, if you're trying to set a boundary and you're afraid to hurt someone's feelings, it could get so long and convoluted that the person listening is like, I don't even know what they're talking about anymore.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that was definitely a point I wanted to cover, is that you don't need to justify
No, you don't
or
have to justify.
defend
Nope,
your
absolutely.
no. You don't have to defend your no. You don't have to justify it. And I think when we remember, like we said, that the boundary is about me, if we remember that and that's where we're coming from, I think our speech will reflect that. So, um, like, a friend asked you for lunch, and you had this other stuff you wanted to get done. You don't have to be, and I think when people are new to boundaries, they feel guilty. They feel guilty when they say no, so they feel like they need to justify and defend it.
Right.
Oh man, I
Absolutely.
wish I could go to lunch, but this is the only day that I have to, clean up the garden, and I can't. If I wait, then it's supposed to rain later in the week, and I was waiting, and then I don't, and then I may have to wait till next week, and it's like, no, 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 no. Like,
Then the person's like, what's she
you
talking about her
don't
garden for?
have to. I know, and they're probably like, I don't care about your garden. I just want to get some lunch. um, and yeah, and then it just, it gets us very far away from our boundaries. So
Absolutely.
with boundaries, I think less is more.
Less
And when
is
I say
more.
less is more, I'm talking about your words. So if
Hmm.
we're going back to lunch and you already had some things on your agenda, and even if it's this really good friend and you would love to have lunch with them, but you
Hmm.
also know that you've been waiting to do X, Y, and Z, then it's like,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for the invite. I would love to go to lunch with you. I have these other things planned for today. So let's try it next week. Just, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you can, it can be short and sweet.
Absolutely. I would love to, period, but I can't today, period.
Yeah.
How's your next week look? Question mark.
Yeah.
Done.
And
Done.
another thing I want to say is, when we're setting a boundary, to omit the apology.
Hmm.
A lot of us, because
Yeah.
we feel bad saying no,
Hmm.
we start off with, "Oh, I'm so
I'm so
sorry.
sorry.
I can't do that." Well,
Mm.
think about what the reasons we apologize. We apologize when we make a mistake, we misstep, we we notice that someone else's feelings are hurt. Like, we apologize when we want to correct something we've said or done.
Right.
When you come
Yeah.
into a boundary apologizing,
Hmm.
it's like you're saying, I know, like, my boundary is wrong,
Yeah.
but so
Yeah.
and no, your
Yeah.
boundary, there is no need to apologize. Omit
Nope.
the apology.
Right. Absolutely. It's like, I'm sorry. It's like I'm saying, I'm sorry for speaking up for my needs, right?
Right, exactly.
Exactly. If everyone else isn't happy, then I'm not going to be happy. So yes,
Yeah,
please do not apologize for speaking up for your needs. Yeah.
exactly. I think we
I,
just generally apologize too much in general, but
yeah,
especially when we're starting to practice boundaries, I think
absolutely.
it's so easy to just you come in with the apology because
Hmm. Oh yeah.
you feel bad saying no.
No, I did it. And I mean, there's so many text messages that I started, and then as I began to set better boundaries, that I would just end up deleting most of the text, right? Because it would
Yeah.
usually say, you usually start out, I'm sorry,
Yep.
comma, right? And
I'm
then
sorry.
I can't make it today, right? Or I can't make that time. And then it would be the next sentence would be a bunch of reasons why. And then before I hit send, I'd be like, okay, first of all, I'm not sorry. So I'm going to delete that part of it. And then I can't make it today. That stays because that's true. And then the laundry list of reasons why I can't, well, that's not important either. And then so then I delete that. And then and then I maybe, because if I do want to connect with the person genuinely, then my follow up would be like, well, are you available later in the week? Like, could you meet for lunch on Thursday or Friday? Because those times would be wide open for me. So if you want to connect, there's no sorries, there's no bunch of explanations, or I can't make it today. Would you be available Thursday or Friday afternoon?
Yeah.
And then now the ball's in their court to have their boundary. So either they can say yes and we can meet, or they can say no, their schedule's busy. Or then, if it really gets sticky and we really want to meet each other, maybe we pick up the phone and have an actual call and try to figure out when in the next week or two our schedules jive. Or is there something that is this meeting or meeting up with connecting with this person important enough that I can maybe cancel something I'm doing that's less important. And that's only because that's more valuable for me, not because I need to make the other person feel better. Like, I would rather meet you and record this podcast than having gone and done something else. So I could have canceled something because I knew this was the best time for us to meet. And this is really valuable for me. And I want to be doing this.
Well, thanks. I'm glad. I'm glad you're here.
Absolutely.
Glad you're spending this hour with me. Oh, before we get too late and have to wrap it
Oh,
up, I believe you brought a quote.
good. I don't know quite who to reference it by because it's the person who's recorded it is Tony Burrows, who I think last time
Mm,
I was on, I gave a quote by him. This
hmm.
is coming through Tony Burrows by a spirit guide named Lee Ching. And so he channels, and a group of other people in his intender circle channel this person. He wrote a book. I brought it so I could show it to you. And I don't know if you've seen it or you know it, but What You Need to Know Now.
Uh, did you bring that to our
I
training?
did. I did. I had this, and I had the Journey to the Heart by Melody Beattie. But this is great, and these are all channeled things by Li Ching that Tony Burrows has written down and captured in this book. And he's got different sections. So there's like power wisdom, there's abundance, there's letting go, there's lifting off. So it's broken into like subsections. But the two sections I love the best are letting, and basically the way I do it is I just let my heart pick what pay, like I just put it up to my heart, and I'll be like, oh, it wants to be here, and I'll just open to that page, and what I read in that moment is what I get. But the one I love is in the sort of the build up to the letting go section, and it's basically just be careful not to let your attachment to anyone or anything take one moment away from your joy.
Wow,
And I
that's
think
good.
I love it, and it fits for boundaries
Yeah,
actually, right?
absolutely.
Because it's very easy for us to be attached to other humans and other things, and specifically for boundaries with us, as if we feel like we have an attachment to a partner or a friend or a parent or whatever, we can let that attachment influence who we are. And then now, if we're doing all these things for other people, and we're feeling depleted and we're feeling resentful, well, that's obviously taking away from our joy, right? So just be careful it's great to have these relationships and these connections, and they're all super important, which is the buildup. It's a longer quote, but the end is just be sure your attachments don't take away one moment of your joy. And I think that's probably where I struggled the most in my life until I realized that I need to speak up for myself and what I need and what I want. And therefore, I will start to implement boundaries.
Yeah, that's great. And it reminds me of something Brene Brown said. Um, Again, I think I learned a lot of my early boundary stuff from her. And she would say, when she was practicing boundaries, someone would ask something, she would pause, like kind of make herself
Mm,
pause just for just a few seconds
right.
and say to herself, choose discomfort over resentment. Because she was
Mm,
someone who was in the habit of just saying yes and then being resentful of the thing that she agreed to do.
yeah.
And then, so choose discomfort is because in that moment, there might be, depending on the exchange and the response from
Right.
the other person, it could be a little discomfort, but that's going to end real soon. And then you're not going to be left with all that resentment.
Hmm.
So that, your quote just reminded me of that, to, yeah, choose, like you said, don't let any, say it again, don't let any attachment.
Don't let your attachment to anyone or
Mm,
anything take one moment away from your joy.
right. So you don't sacrifice yourself
Yeah,
to try to please everybody else.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So, um, I don't want to keep you too long. I'm wondering if maybe we can do like a quick summary and maybe a few quick takeaways or tips for, people starting out with boundaries. And,
Yeah, that's
the one we talked about was like less is more, right?
less is more. Yeah, you know, don't apologize
Don't
for
apologize.
speaking your boundary. Just say it succinctly. You don't owe someone a lot of explanation, a lot of background, and don't make them roundabout and uncomfortable, in terms of having to over justify things. So again, most of it goes back to less is more, which I think is why the no is a beautiful one to think of in its simplicity, right? Um, but a lot of us want to give more than a no, and that's absolutely okay too. The other thing that occurs to me is don't agree to like it goes back to the Brene Brown, choosing the discomfort over the resentment, is don't agree to something that you don't want to go to, and then you're going to have to find out a way to get out of, because then I think that makes everything worse for everyone, right? So now
Yeah.
you're feeling uncomfortable because now you've agreed to this thing that now you got to figure out how to back out of. And now if you agreed to it, means you didn't have something else going on. So now do you feel like you might have to be constructing a lie to get out of it? So that doesn't feel good. And then now the other person is actually expecting you, and now there's some sense of obligation, and now you got to kind of double backpedal to get back out of it. So that's a big right there. Like if you know you're not going to do it, don't say yes and then spend the rest of your time trying to figure out how you're going to get out of
I feel like that. I
it.
feel like that having to try to back out. I feel like that discomfort is way worse than
Absolutely.
the discomfort you may feel when you say no.
Yeah.
Way
People,
worse.
people get all kinds of physical, your stomach hurts, you get a headache, your chest feels tight. Who knows what it is for you, but that's how you're going to end up feeling. And then even after you do it, then you feel sort of guilty and bad. And it's just like, yeah, it's a no go. So, and for people that aren't used to doing it, it's okay to make like not mistakes, but it's okay to like not let them out right. It's okay to err on the opposite extreme too, and then figuring out, oh well, now I've basically said no to everything, or I've been speaking my voice in this way. Like, okay, maybe I need to tone that back. And I think if there's people you really trust and respect, share with them what you're doing. Hey, I realized, Trish, I realized I've been saying yes to and doing everything for everyone all the time. What I really want to do, an intention I want to bring in, is start being more authentic about what I'm okay with and what I'm not. So I'm gonna try out these new things called boundaries. I'm just letting you know. And hey, if I might suck at this or I might not be that good at this, but I want to let you know because you're an important part of my life, and I'm gonna need. We all have to have boundaries with everyone, and then you can just say, okay, I got you. And if you want to be super supportive, you're like, let's see how this works and let's give it a try. And then there's clearly people that you might not be able to do that with, like maybe your mom or whomever it is that's been overbearing in that way. But maybe start with little ones with those people, and then work it in, and maybe not 10 boundaries in a row. That's another good one. Like, I don't want to be talked down to. I don't want to be this and that. I'm not meeting you every Tuesday. Like if we pull out a laundry, if we've had zero boundaries and now we pull out a scroll of 25 boundaries for
Here
one
are all the things you
person.
cannot say to me, cannot ask of me, and
Most of
cannot
them are
do
not
around
going
me.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, they're not going to remember all these things. Number one,
Uh,
number two. But okay, you kind of get the point. But yeah, start small. Don't be afraid to. They might not come out perfectly the first time. They probably won't. Practice with someone you trust.
yeah.
Practice
Yeah.
with a friend. Practice with a coach. Practice. Give us a call. Do a session with you. Do a session with me. We can spend the whole thing on setting up
Yeah.
healthy
We can talk
boundaries.
about
Absolutely,
boundaries. Um,
all hour long.
I another one when you were talking, I thought about is realizing you don't have to answer right away. You don't have to
Mhm.
make a decision immediately. So if someone
Absolutely.
asks, makes a request or an invite, and you're and then you start spinning, should or shouldn't or this and
Hmm.
that. Just take a beat and say, let me think about
Let me
it.
get, yeah, let me get back to
Let me
you.
think about it. Get back to you. And
Yeah,
then give yourself that time to process it and think, I really don't want to do this. So
yeah.
let me
Oh,
think
yeah,
about, let me think of a nice way to, a nice way to say that.
yeah,
So give yourself the time you need. Like you said, start small and give
yeah.
yourself time. You don't have to have um, this perfectly worded boundary right away or this boundary
Absolutely.
statement when someone asks for something. Um,
Right.
but now that I'm saying that, I think another good tip is to have a few scripts in your back pocket.
Hmm.
For example, for invites,
Hmm.
whether it's lunch or happy hour or party or whatever it is, just have a couple scripts in your back pocket so you don't have to think about it. When they
No.
ask you, when you don't want to go, have your script for invites. Like,
Right.
hey, thanks for
Yeah.
the invite. I got some other stuff going on.
Yeah. I'm not available at that time.
Something.
Yeah. I'm not available that night. I'm not available for
Yeah.
lunch that day. Yeah. Super simple.
Yeah.
No
Um,
reasons. Yeah.
and another script I like that I thought about that our friend Michelle has used, not teacher Michelle, friend Michelle
Right.
has said, and this is more about personal things like personal relationships where people are maybe, uh, especially family, where they
Hmm.
um, maybe they're a little overbearing, maybe they push in too much because that's what they've always done, and now here you are practicing boundaries. And what she said that I thought was so beautiful was, I'm not available to be talked to that way. Like,
Mm.
I'm not available for
Yeah.
that, for blank. I'm not available
Yeah.
for blank. And it was
Right.
very simple and very effective. And it was
Yeah.
not, you can't do this, you can't say that. It
No.
was just,
Right.
it was me. It was taking ownership. I'm not available for that right now.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that could cover a lot of things, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And that reminds me of something I did want to share. Is, especially if it's a situation where someone's talking in a way to you that's uncomfortable. Like it's easy. It's not easy, but it's a really healthy thing to do to say, that's not making me feel good, or I don't like the way that feels. Right. And that's basically, and no one can take that away from you because no one can argue with how you say you're feeling in that moment. Right. Like you're not turning it on that person, like, don't talk to me that way or whatever. Like, that doesn't feel good for me. What you're
Right.
saying doesn't feel good for me right now.
Right.
And that's it. That's a boundary.
Right.
Like, please stop.
Yeah, exactly. But you're And like you just said, you're making it about you. I'm making
Yeah.
it about me. I'm
Hmm.
uncomfortable. So,
Hmm.
we can stop the conversation, or I'll just leave,
Yes. Yeah.
because what I need is to be in a different space. So
Yeah.
we can change the
Absolutely.
space, or I can leave the space. That's
Hmm.
always your choice.
Yeah. And the cool thing is with I'm not available for that is also that could be an internal boundary. That could be something that you're telling yourself, right? Like say all of a sudden you're getting a call from a toxic friend or someone that they're in a bad space and it's just they're going to want to escalate. You could look at the phone and be like, ooh, I'm not available for that right now, and put the phone back down, and that's it. That's a boundary right there.
Oh, that's such a good one. Just not answering your phone.
Yeah.
That's setting a boundary. That's not being rude or mean or
Mm-mm.
selfish.
I'm not available
If
for
you are
that right
not
now.
available for the conversation, just
Right.
not answering the phone
Yeah.
is taking care of
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean you're busy with something else. You're just not available for that energy, right? Or like, even putting your phone on do not disturb at 9 p.m.
Hmm.
and your friends and family know that, hey, that's I'm shutting it down at 9 unless it's like a critical emergency where you can get through my do not disturb, or I've seen that you've called 11 times. Like that's a boundary. I'll get back
Yeah,
to you tomorrow.
right. Yeah, I think what's important is to start practicing recognizing your needs and recognizing that it's okay to have them
Yeah.
and it's okay to honor them. And
Yeah.
it's about you, it's not about everyone else. Your
Hmm.
needs are about you.
Yeah.
And just start listening. When you're in a situation and you feel uncomfortable, notice that. Start listening to yourself. That feeling of discomfort, that's your inner self trying to tell you this is not a good place for us.
Hmm.
So just listening to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, this doesn't make me. Yeah. Once you start to recognize what your needs are, for me anyway, I was like, I would be in situations and be like, ooh, this isn't comfortable. Where like maybe before that, I wasn't even tuned into it, right? And I'd just be there, and maybe I kind of couldn't wait till it would end, or I could leave, or whatever. But now it's like, ooh, this doesn't feel good. Like, do I say something? Do I need to say something, or do I just need to remove myself? And either one is a fine way to do it. And but again, that's being tuned into you and what you want and what you need and what feels okay for you, not for the other person.
Right. Right. Boundaries are about me.
Hmm. The one thing we didn't talk too much about workplace boundaries. And I think that gets to be a really sticky one. And so maybe just a couple thoughts on that is, we have lived in a culture where I think people put a lot of us put work first. I think that's shifting for newer, younger generations. But just be very careful for, are you giving everything to a job, and that giving everything is really sacrificing your own well-being and the well-being of your loved ones, your family members, your kids, your partner, your whomever, your dog, even doesn't matter. If you're getting paid for a 40-hour a week job and you're working 60 hours a week, there's clearly something wrong there.
Right.
Maybe that's a part two. That's work boundaries.
Well,
Boundaries part two, the workplace.
I was just going to say, I think workplace boundaries could be its own
Yeah,
episode.
absolutely. But yeah, be thoughtful about if you're always missing your kids' activity because you're working late, or your partner's always feeling bummed out or left out because you always home super an hour or 2 hours after you say you are for a missed dinner or miss whatever. Like, all right, that should be a pretty big warning that you don't have good workplace boundaries.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Thanks. I just want to say real quick that that book that book that you brought, um, I have to have a picture. I have a picture on my phone of the
Huh?
page because I was probably like day two, like I had just met you,
Right.
and you were talking. It was like on a break, and you were talking to people about this book, and I was like, hey, and you were like, oh, you just open to a page, and that's whatever you need to hear that day, and I was like, no way. I was like, So then I was like, all right, let me try it. And I opened it and it was, I mean, I can't remember what it said. I'd have to look it up, but it was like meaningful. And I was like, oh wow. And then I showed
Yeah.
you and you were like, and you just hugged me. And it was like such this really cool moment. And I was like, this is so great, like, and I'm so glad you showed me that book because I listened to a podcast not long ago with Tony Burrows, and he
Mm,
mentioned that book, and I heard
okay.
it, and I was like, I wonder if that's the book Russell had, and
Yeah,
now I know it was, and
absolutely.
I think I want to have it now because it's really really cool, and I like how you put it to your heart and just say, okay,
Hmm.
this is what I need to hear today.
Exactly. Those are the two things I do. Melody Beattie's Journey to the Heart has every day from like January 1st to December 31st. And she says you can either read it chronologically or you can also just pick it out. I read hers for each day. So, this morning when I got up, I read April 29th and this one I just do randomly. So I do both of those things every morning.
Okay.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, cool.
Cool.
All right, so I guess we'll see you back here for workplace boundaries.
Absolutely. I'll be the regular.
Or whatever the next topic is that we want to chat about.
Absolutely.
It'll be
Yeah.
something. Yeah,
Put me
no,
in the
I
rotation.
absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate you coming back. This was a really great conversation, and I hope I hope people found something useful in it for them.
Absolutely. Cool.
All right, cool. Well, to everyone listening, as always, you are enough, just as you are, and you are loved. Make a great day.